Afternoon. Welcome back. We have the opportunity now to talk to Angela Vogel, co-founder of the Philadelphia Drivers Union. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're all waiting to hear, what is the Philadelphia Drivers Union and when did it come about?
Well, the Philadelphia Drivers Union actually started in early of 2016. At that time, we called ourselves the Philadelphia Limousine Association, and it was a group of drivers who were driving for Uber, the Uber platform, that wanted to organize with their drivers for better treatment and fair pay. In early of 2019, we decided to expand our efforts to include a broader range of drivers, and so we've rebranded as the Philadelphia Drivers Union.
And how big is your union?
We have about 2,000 members. The limits to how big we could be, there kind of aren't any. It's estimated that there's about 25 to 40,000 Uber and Lyft drivers in the Philadelphia metro area. And then we also have a lot of overlap with drivers that drive for other platforms like DoorDash and that sort of thing. Most drivers are working more than one platform at a time. But we tend right now to focus mostly on passenger for hire drivers, which is Uber and Lyft.
And what are your main concerns at this point?
Well, our concerns range from gigantic national concerns to very small local concerns. Our biggest concern, if we use a broad lens, is the erosion of workers' rights. Employers are using loopholes in the law to avoid being responsible for their workers, to avoid things like minimum wage, workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, and the right to unionize. By calling us independent contractors instead of employees, it leaves the onus on the driver to prove that they are entitled to all of the things that an employee would get. And Uber and Lyft, they've got billions of investment capital, and they've gotten very, very good at walking right along the edge of what would constitute enough control to make us employees. So from a broader lens, that's our big concern. We, of course, deal with more minute details. Like, for example, here in Philadelphia, Uber has recently rolled out something called Uber Comfort that requires that a driver wait up to 10 minutes for their passenger, even when in Center City, where the city has actually passed all kinds of initiatives, mostly under their Vision Zero programs, that punish drivers for doing what we're supposed to do to get our job done, and tickets drivers. So that is a concern that we'll be meeting with the mayor about in the next couple weeks.
And can you tell us what Vision Zero means?
Oh, Vision Zero is a program in Philadelphia, and it started in Sweden. It's kind of all over the world, to encourage funding and investment in city infrastructures that eliminates traffic deaths. So drivers are very frequently the target of that, right, where they're thinking about pedestrians and cyclists. And so drivers are often the ones that are going to be punished by some of these programs. So for example, in Philadelphia, it was on our ballot in May to expand community police, meaning give our police department additional funding so that they can have police officers that basically just write traffic tickets. And they specifically, from our experience and our drivers' members' experience, they specifically target Uber and Lyft drivers that are waiting for passengers. That ticket is usually about $76, which could be a driver's entire earnings for the day. And if they go to Uber or Lyft and say, look, I was trying to do the job you told me to do. You told me to wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes or up to 15 minutes. And so you should pay this because it is in the service of your company. And Uber and Lyft are going to say, you're an independent contractor. We have no responsibility for that. So connecting the big broad issues with sort of the minute ones is this issue of control and responsibility. And these large venture capital backed companies, tech companies, have basically written a whole playbook on how big corporations can avoid any accountability, whether it's for their employees, which we believe drivers are, whether it's for their workers or their passengers, and they just get to collect all of the profit and go home laughing, not responsible for anything.
So you said your union is about 4,000?
2,000.
2,000, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's
about
the
2,000
makeup?
members.
Men, women,
Yeah.
different ethnic groups?
Yeah, it's interesting. So traditionally under taxi industries, people imagine for hire drivers as being largely immigrants and black. I would say since the 80s or 90s, since about the 90s when they sort of started to lose union representation. What's been interesting about Uber and Lyft is that it is still the same groups of people that are experiencing the biggest impacts, right? So your average, most full-time drivers are people of color or people that have, something that prevents them from finding work elsewhere. But because of the ease of accessibility, where you could just take out your phone right now and go take a picture of your registration on your vehicle and get a real quick background check, and then you're driving with no training, no nothing. Because of that accessibility, a broader range of people have been using Uber and Lyft as a stopgap for declining wages. But our union, I would say, is still a pretty large minority immigrants and people of color. The for-hire driving industry is still male-dominated, but Uber and Lyft have, since the advent of Uber and Lyft, we do see a lot more women. Where previously you'd have 2 women drivers in the whole city. Women went from about 4% of the industry up to, it's anyone's guess because Uber and Lyft don't have to report numbers, but it's estimated that women are about 20 to 30% of the workforce.
And how did you get involved? How did you become so involved?
Primarily, the reason why I've been working on it this long is because I'm a driver myself. I've been through a number of recessions and layoffs. I was laid off in 2008, and a lot of times the effects of that, you never quite come out of it, and I see more and more of my friends having to work multiple jobs despite our education or any access that may be used to benefit us, right? I had built a career in retail. Retail's almost entirely gone. So at one point I became a labor union organizer. I worked for a number of the large labor unions, and I think there's a lot of brilliant work being done out there, but I also think that the large labor unions, the ones that would fall under that 501c5 category, the big names that we know, the SEIUs and USWs and Teamsters and all of these, I think there's a lot of really great work being done in their rank and file, but sometimes we kind of hit a wall in getting folks that have been around that work a long time to see that the world has changed a lot, and there's all these new loopholes and different things being used, and that they may need to take more risk and try different things, or even return to our history, right? 100 years ago, unions were gaining a lot of strength. They weren't just showing up at the bargaining table with the corporate bosses. They were really out in the streets being very radical. Labor movements were led by workers, and that's, I think, one of the biggest changes is now you see union organizers that are career union organizers. They're not part of the workforce. They've never been part of the workforce. They're organizing. There's places where that makes sense, but it's created a culture of even unionized workers not being able to stand up for themselves, thinking that it's someone else's job to stand up for them. The union's supposed to do it. They see it as a separate entity rather than something created by them and their coworkers. I worked for a very short period of time with a coalition that was led by the Taxi Workers Alliance, the very brand new Philadelphia Limousine Association, and a few other organizations. And I felt that work needed to continue, and I was driving myself to make ends meet. And so there's a little bit of self-interest in it. But even some of our members that have discontinued driving, continue to participate because they see that what we're doing impacts the entire job market.
So looking to the future, what would you like to see happen?
A couple of things. First of all, we need statewide or national legislation similar to what was passed in California, the AB 5 bill that asserts that you are an employee if what you do is part of the primary work of the company. And nobody can argue that Uber's primary work is not giving rides. They're trying in court, but so we'd like to see statewide legislation. It doesn't all have to look like what they've done in California. I think, it's okay to experiment a little bit and see where the right balance is between employee and independent contractor. In Pennsylvania, obviously that's going to be much, much harder than in other states like California or New York.
And why is that?
Well, we have a Republican House and Senate in our state. And it creates a lot of challenges for us when we are looking to grow, acquire resources to be able to grow the union, because funders want safe investments. And California's maybe a safe investment, New York's maybe even Massachusetts, but Pennsylvania often gets very much left behind. We're kind of a purple state, but right now our state's controlled by Republicans. So it'll be much harder to get anything passed. However, one of our main goals, while we work to build the right kind of climate to get major changes passed, is to teach all drivers and really all workers how to assert the rights that they already have. So, for example, we have a number of drivers with the Philadelphia Drivers Union have won after unfair deactivations. Deactivation is basically getting fired from Uber or Lyft because of violations in fair hiring ordinances. We want to teach drivers how to file wage theft complaints, because wage theft is rampant. And a number of other things that even as independent contractors that aren't covered by the FLSA or the NLRA, we do still have some rights that if everybody knew how to assert it, things would improve. And then if people move on, because there's such a short amount of time that on average, the average Uber driver only stays driving for Uber about 6 months. If they learn those skills with us and then they move on to another position where they're an employee and have all of these additional rights, they're going to be much better at asserting their rights in their workplace.
Lately, drivers have been in the news because of women being threatened while they're driving with them. Mm-hmm. How has that impacted the union?
That's an interesting question. So it goes both ways, right? There's currently a class action lawsuit of passengers that felt that their claims to Uber and Lyft of sexual assault or harassment by drivers wasn't addressed as well. And then on the flip side, a lot of women drivers experience that. I, in fact, just had a passenger stalk me to find me on social media, the one little place it's really hard to find me because I don't really use social media very much. He stalked me and found me and sent me a dick pic. Can I say that? And it was very harassing to open it up and be like, how did this guy find me? Why is this graphic thing in my inbox? So I think that, we try to approach it, from understanding that this is more broadly an experience of women no matter what we're doing. Right. As a union, we believe that we have the right solutions to make driving safer, not just for drivers, but for passengers as well. The things that our Public Utilities Commission have pushed for Uber and Lyft to do don't accomplish that. HR research, human resources research, shows that the best way to ensure that you have a safe employee is to meet them, take time to talk to them, and have frequent check-ins with coworkers, because if there's an issue, a coworker is going to know. Uber and Lyft and other platform economy work have eliminated human connection at all. I can go work for Uber and never having spoken to another human with Uber ever. And we would like that kind of interaction that you would normally have in a job interview and in a workplace. We would like to restore that, because the most usually the most terrifying kind of criminals, the people that want to act predatory towards women and children, they also have the lowest conviction rates. Where people that, we have a number of drivers that have had close calls because of being, Blackwell shopping or that sort of thing. And those might be people that would be excluded if we look only at criminal records.
What is Blackwell shopping?
Blackwell driving, like they were, we had one member that he got arrested for an armed robbery, and the image of the robbery and him, it was very obviously not the same person. So he was, he was acquitted. Charges were dropped later, but he was temporarily deactivated and couldn't work just because he happened to be a black man in the area where this crime happened and wearing similar boots.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said black while driving?
Right.
I'm sorry, I heard Blackwell driving.
Oh.
And I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So our Public Utilities Commission pushed Uber and Lyft that now if a passenger complains, so if, let's say you were riding in my car and you told Uber all you have to do is click a little thing on the app, car smelled like weed. It used to be that Uber would investigate it, and if it seemed like you didn't have it, you were driving all the rest of the day and nobody else complained, they would maybe leave it go. It was actually the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission that forces Uber and Lyft that the minute they get a complaint, you're deactivated for at least 24 hours, which can be very, very hard on drivers. Basically losing a whole day of work just because someone was trying to get a free ride.
So the union has work to do to protect their members, as well as to give appropriate input so that the driver can be protected as well. That's
right, and we don't have a lot of tools to protect our members. It's one of the reasons why we don't charge membership dues. The tools afforded to independent contractors to protect themselves against these predatory employers are almost none, particularly when you have these arbitration agreements that Uber and Lyft have, which means if I feel I was treated unfairly in some kind of way by Uber and Lyft, I may not even be able to sue them. Even if it's pretty clear that I would win a lawsuit like that, I am first forced to file a request for arbitration, a demand for arbitration. And they have thousands and thousands of arbitration claims that they've never arbitrated. So it really drives home the reality that we live in a climate right now where just voting, just signing a petition, just paying your union dues is not going to be enough, that we need real political action, we need people out in the streets, we need people banding with their coworkers to demand that their rights are recognized.
How can we get in touch with you to find more about what your union is doing and to give suggestions as they may come up?
Sure. Our website is just PhillyDrivers.com, pretty simple to remember. And then we're also on Facebook under Philadelphia Drivers Union.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What was the apartheid system of South Africa? The National Party, which represented the Afrikaners, the descendants of the Dutch, also called the Boers, they took over the parliament. They were the majority, and they decided racial segregation must be put into law. So in 1950, they passed the Population Registration Act. Every person 16 years or older must register by his race: Bantu, black, African, or white, or colored, mixed race, which also had subgroups of Indian and Asian. Every person who lived in South Africa must carry a passbook, or what was really a passport, with their picture telling their race, and for Africans, their tribal designation. No blacks could live in the city. All the blacks who lived in the city were moved out by force and had to form townships. In 1953, seeing that the Africans were not going to comply peacefully, the Public Safety Act and Criminal Law Amendment Act was passed. Anyone who would not comply with the 300 apartheid laws would receive harsh punishment: jail, beatings, torture, prison. Blacks could only do manual labor and agricultural labor. Jobs were designated white or black. Limited education for blacks. And now the Bantustans were established. 10 Bantustans, depending on your ethnic or tribal designation. If you were Zulu, you would have, if they were like the reservations that Native Americans were put on. Whites owned 87% of the land. They only were 4.5% millions. Let me say that again. Whites made up almost 5 million, 4.5 million people in the population. The black Africans were 19 million, but the 19 million were crowded into 10 Bantustans called homelands. They were supposed to have self-rule, but of course they did not have self-rule. They had 13% of the worst land in the country. Whites had 87% of the land. The Bantustans were not able to govern themselves as designated on paper. They were in trusteeship of the government. By establishing the Bantustans, it was divide and conquer. At the same time, the African National Congress was trying to bring together Africans of any ethnic or tribal designation to fight against the apartheid system. It was inclusive, and any coloreds, Indians, whites who wanted to join the ANC could do it. Anyone who was against the apartheid system, they were bringing them together. In 1960, in the township of Sharpsville, the people decided, we will not obey the pass laws. We will not carry a pass. And the police came, and when there was a protest, 69 people were killed. 160 169 were injured. The system was brutal. It was a terrible segregation, taking the indigenous people off of the land, taking their land away. 3.5 million people were forced to leave the cities and towns and go to a reservation. And the reservation, even the designated leaders of the Bantustans said it was wrong. But all over the world, people began to organize an anti-apartheid movement, and Philadelphia had a strong one for divestment. And this Lucian Blackwell, David Cohen, they headed the Philadelphia to divest from any business that did business with South Africa. And in the Pennsylvania legislature, State Representative David P. Richardson led a divestment and sanctions campaign. Finally, in 1986, the U.S. Congress passed sanctions and divestment laws over President Reagan's veto. Very thankful to Dr. Asante, Malefe Asante, and Dr. Cato, who was a South African at Temple University. Because of them, we, the African and African American Studies Department at Temple, we were able to store all of our collection in Stauffer Hall, which was empty because it was going to be torn down. We could also give conferences, forums. Here is our booking. We sent books to 2 primary schools in Soweto. We adopted a school near Johannesburg, a secondary school. After 30 years of activities in the anti-apartheid struggle, City Council, City of New York, awarded Francis Amafco a citation for our 30 years in the struggle and our 30 years of activities. It lists all of the different activities that we did over the 30 years. And it says, therefore, by virtue of this citation, the Council of the City of Philadelphia does hereby honor and recognize Francis Amafco on the occasion of his 30th anniversary. We commend Francis Amafco for 30 years of philanthropic work, and extend to all involved our sincere respect, admiration, and appreciation of this legislative body. Happy 30th anniversary. Signed, Janie L. Blackwell, Councilwoman of the 3rd District, Darrell L. Clark, President of Philadelphia City Council.